Dear ladies and gentlemen, esteemed experts, my name is Alia Al-Janibi, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all on today's symposium on behalf of Dr. Mohammed Al-Ali, the CEO of Trends Research and Advisory. The topic of today's symposium is highly relevant and of importance to academics as well as policymakers. It discusses an uncertain future in regard to developments in the field of warfare and military industries. Indeed, the history of warfare is littered with problematic assumptions and questionable forecasts. Yet, the sensationalism of high-tech weaponry seems to be leading us towards a dire international security environment. This new high-tech weaponry disrupts our traditional expectations about warfare. Professor Klaus Schwab, the chairman and founder of the World Economic Forum, discussed the collapse of barriers between digital and the physical, and between the synthetic and the organic, which constitutes a fourth industrial revolution. According to Prof. Schwab, this creates a level of change comparable to that brought about by steam power, electricity, and computing, for example. Major military powers are increasingly investing in innovation and R&D, and the space sector is at the forefront of exploration. What's next in terms of the US declining competitive advantage and China's, Russia's, Iran's, as well as North Korea's ambitions and objectives? How will Middle East security be affected by all these developments? Will the social, political, and cultural context determine where, when, and why wars will occur? Or even who will gain the competitive military advantage in battle? Humanity is threatened by a loss of trust, especially between those who already draw power from the last industrial revolutions and between those whose power is rising within the context of a very complex environment. The conversation needs to foster a sense of mutual understanding and address underlying fears. We need new forms of responsive leadership that serves the common good. We have a distinguished panel gathered today to explore all of this and add to our understanding of the subject. We look forward to hearing from them. Once again, on behalf of Trends Research and Advisory, I thank all the panelists, the moderator, and viewers worldwide who have joined us today to participate in this session. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give the floor to our moderator, Dr. John Bruni. Thank you very much. Dr. John, I think you're muted.
I don't know how that happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for that. I will start again. I'm John Bruni, CEO of SAGE International, a private not-for-profit geopolitical think tank based in the defence, manufacturing and space capital of Australia, Adelaide, South Australia. Welcome to this E-Symposium on the future of wars and military industries hosted by Trends Research and Advisory, Abu Dhabi, UAE. We have an apology from one of our speakers today who could not make it due to unforeseen circumstances, Dr. Nikolai Gunderson. We are sorry he couldn't make it and we wish him well. However, today we will be joined by two excellent speakers, Yakov Lapin and Dr. Uzi Rubin. Yakov is a research associate at the Begin Sadat Besa Center for Strategic Studies. His specialities include Israel's defense establishment, military affairs, and the Middle East's strategic environment. He is the author of the Besa study, The Low-Profile War Between Israel and Hezbollah. Uzi has spent much of his career in missile defense and aerospace. He is an expert in missile defense and the resilience of Israel's home front for the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Gentlemen, welcome. To start off, Yakov will present. Yakov, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and to share some of my thoughts. I will be discussing the issue of artificial intelligence and military capabilities in the 21st century. And before anything else, I think it's important to set the context in terms of the challenge that all modern militaries are trying to adapt themselves to. We are in an era in which adversaries present time-sensitive targets. They appear and disappear quickly. Urban warfare is not only the present, it's also going to be the future of much of warfare, at least in the Middle East. We are witnessing the proliferation of precision firepower that was once reserved for great powers. It's now proliferating to radical non-state actors. And we're seeing the miniaturization of technology, which is boosting adversary capabilities. We're especially seeing that when it comes to the Iranian Axis and the Iranian defense industries, who are then proliferating that weapons technology to a range of radical proxies that are active throughout the region. Now, when it comes to responding to that in this arms race, what we're seeing is that Western militaries and Israel and the IDF are certainly playing a lead role here. They're increasingly incorporating artificial intelligence as a core component in what appears to me to be a revolution, a new revolution in military affairs. And there are several examples of this. I understand the time is a little bit limited. So the first thing I would like to look at is how AI is boosting tactical and strategic decision-making. Now, as part of my work in covering defense trends, I interviewed in 2017 a lieutenant colonel in the IDF by the name of Nurit Cohen, Inger. She was the former head of the Sigma department, which is a part of the LOTEM Information Technology and Communications Unit. And she told me some remarkable things about what AI is doing in the IDF. She talked about how machine learning and deep learning are gradually being introduced at all levels of IDF decision making. So it's already helping the IDF in analyzing vast quantities of video feeds, which are then used to sound off alerts and save a lot of time for human operators. So there are special algorithms that have been developed for video analysis. They do real-time video surveillance, and then they flag suspicious activity automatically. And this technology is being extended to the point where human operators in the future will no longer be needed for video surveillance, and that is a revolutionary development in my view. Now, this same kind of technology is helping the IDF also deal with audio and text-based intelligence that it gathers around the clock. So that is one aspect. Now, another aspect is we saw in 2014 during the war between Israel and Hamas, artificial intelligence already coming into play when it comes to tactical decision making. What happened was that the IDF began gathering all the information it had about rocket launches from Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other patterns by adversary actors in Gaza. And they used that to create forecasts about what was likely to happen in the next 24 hours in certain areas. Now, this requires very powerful computers, complex mathematical algorithms, and this information, these forecasts were fed to battalion commanders on the ground. That is a glimmer, in my opinion, of what artificial intelligence is going to be bringing to the battlefield in the coming years. So the end goal here, as far as the IDF is concerned, is to eventually equip every a commander in the field with the ability to use big data tools to make battlefield decisions. And this can influence every step in a conflict, small or large, in the future. So human commanders will still have the final say. They will still be making the decisions, but they will receive precise and relevant recommendations. And the more time goes by, I think the more precise those recommendations will be. And I think this is a trend to watch out for in terms of how AI is going to be influencing battlefield decision-making in real time. Now, another thing I think that has to be looked at is the issue of how AI is beginning to play a really big role in the analysis of intelligence sensor information. One example of that is a product developed by Israel Aerospace Industries. It's called Starlight. It's developed by IAI ELTA, and it was developed to address a problem which has been described in the past. I think it's an American general who said that soldiers, commanders, and analysts in the field are drowning in data but are starving for information. So there's just far too much unprocessed data coming into battlefield actors, and they need an automatic system to start translating that into actionable intelligence that can be used to take action, and not merely to just receive updates and drown in those updates. So what a system like Starlight does is it collects information from a range of sensors and sources. It doesn't matter if it's a comment, SIGINT, ELINT, electro-optical intelligence. It's really sort of agnostic about where the source comes from, and it uses AI to convert all of this unstructured data into very precise applicable intelligence, essentially figuring out where enemy targets are and when they are at those locations. So it does target generation, it does target detection, threat alerts, mission planning, and creates levels of insights that have so far not been available. And IAI Starlight basically uses a NATO standard for translating all this information into time and location data on enemy activity. Now, what I find really interesting about Starlight is that it can be told to flag things that are incredibly specific. Say you want to know when a red car is traveling at a certain speed in a certain geographical location. So the system will filter out all of the other noise and only see that signal, only find out when that red car is traveling in a designated area. And it can also be used for change detection. Let's say, you're using a persistent surveillance system and you want to know when there's unusual vehicle traffic to this launch site, to this rocket launch site. So a system like Starlight will flag that automatically. Now, this takes huge amounts of burden off human operators, and I think it's another sign of where AI is going in terms of battlefield capabilities. Another example that I think is worth looking at is Raphael's Fireweaver system. This is a system that has been acquired by the IDF. And what this does is it creates a rapid shooter-to-sensor capability, but it does it in a very unique way. It's very heavily reliant on AI. And what it does is it connects all the sensors and all the shooters in a certain arena, and then it automatically allocates a shooter in line with the parameters and the needs, the operational needs that have been defined. So just to bring that down to a real-world example, let's say there's a company commander who detects an anti-tank cell who's located on the 5th floor of a building. So Fireweaver will send out what's called a firepower tender. And it's a bit like saying, who's available to take care of this threat. And if it happens to be a helicopter that's selected by the system automatically, because it has just the kind of right missile to send through that window and it's located in the right range, then that order will go out automatically within seconds. And the helicopter is selected based on algorithms to handle that target. So this is using AI to deal with this problem of time-sensitive targets, whereas in the past, you had asymmetrical terrorist armies, really, like Hezbollah and Hamas, able to utilize their advantage, fire, and then vanish. These kinds of technologies are designed to cancel out that advantage. Another example I think that is really worth looking at is a recently unveiled missile by Raphael called Seabreaker. This is a missile that deploys infrared seeking and artificial intelligence to automatically acquire targets as it approaches them, and it distinguishes between civilian and military targets. So, for example, let's say it's fired at an enemy ship, and it approaches a port or a harbor. It uses AI to automatically distinguish between a civilian and a military ship, and that means that it can be fired from a standoff range of up to 300 kilometers. And only when it approaches the target will it have to decide, okay, this is the non-combatant target, we're going to move away from that and we're going to lock on to the military target. So that's ideal for the engagement of maritime targets, whether they're stationary or moving. And it's another example of AI coming into play in terms of target detection, target selection, and giving more operational freedom to Western militaries that would use this kind of technology, this artificial intelligence fueled technology. So it's an interesting missile. It flies at subsonic speeds, and it can be used, also to synchronize multiple missile attacks on the same target. It can come in from different directions. It flies at very low altitudes. I mean, all of these capabilities, including the ability to navigate at a very low altitude and navigate, using scene matching technologies, is fueled by artificial intelligence. I think another thing that's really worth looking at is the way artificial intelligence is being used to create autonomous battlefield platforms. And one example of this that I think is very interesting to look out for is the Carmel next generation fighting vehicle, which is being developed by the Israeli Defense Ministry. The Israeli Defense Ministry asked Israel's 3 largest defense companies to develop prototypes of what Carmel would look like. And one of the interesting prototypes developed by IAI employs a system called Athena, which is an onboard a computer system that basically enables new levels of autonomous functions for armored vehicles. And this includes the ability to automatically detect enemy locations, recommend target engagement options, and to fire on targets after receiving the approval. And I think that when we're looking at these kinds of capabilities, seeing is really the most effective way. So I'm going to share a brief video with you if I can. Let me share my screen and my sound and share this video that I think really illustrates the capabilities that we're looking at here. Okay, so. We are going to do the slideshow from the current slides.
Sources. She autonomously analyzes and classifies the targets, prioritizes the responses, and then provides the force with recommendations for action. After the force's approval, Athena autonomously performs the action, whether it's firing or maneuvering. Let's see her in action.
Engaging now at 300 meters. Engaging with cannon at 1,500 meters.
Approved.
All targets neutralized. Anti-tank missile at 3 kilometers. Intercepted. Othello and radar detected the launcher location. Out of range. Sending target to Carmel 2. Missile destroyed.
Oh, that was a close one.
Target received. Engaging with cannon at 2 kilometers.
Approved.
Target neutralized by Carmel 2.
That was fast. Let's see how it all happened. The hostiles were picked up and classified by StormGuard, IAI's revolutionary multi-mission radar for ground and air threats, and by the electro-optic system. Athena prioritized the first strike and then recommended an appropriate response. I hope you notice that before firing, the system made a crucial distinction between friendly and hostile forces. Then, the anti-tank missile was neutralized. The location of the launcher detected by Othello was sent through IAI's Advanced Communication Network to Carmel 2 that neutralized the threat. And all that happened in a matter of seconds.
Launching drone prior to advance. Start moving en route. IED detected en route.
Now, this vehicle is going to go on to navigate by itself through the battlefield. It's going to detect IEDs on the side of the road by itself. It will continue to use radar to detect adversaries hiding behind walls. And at some point, it even recommends to the 2 on-member crew to disembark so that it can travel through the most dangerous part of the village on its own and take on the targets, and then the crew rejoin. And the fact that there are only 2 crew members on board is possible because of the fact that this 3rd crew member is an artificial intelligence system that's controlling the engines, it's controlling the weapon system, it's controlling the communications. It's doing so much for these onboard human operators that really their area of responsibility has become much more focused. They're much more able to deal with other things, and it's not science fiction to imagine in a number of years, I don't know what that number is, a fully autonomous armored vehicle with these capabilities traveling through a hostile village on its own. So that is, I think, a very powerful example of where these sort of autonomous battlefield capabilities could be headed in the next 5-6 years as a first step, and then developing pretty rapidly after that into even more autonomous capabilities. And I understand that time is limited here for my presentation, so I think the last thing I'd want to touch on when it comes to AI is the way that it's influencing the ability of militaries to simulate conflict with adversaries. If in the past this was done, in a kind of map in a sandbox, today we have electronic sandboxes. And the IDF has been using increasingly powerful AI systems to simulate battles with its adversaries to help commanders and planners make decisions such as how to prepare forces against the enemy, how to build up forces in the years to come. And they help the military to also consider which weapon systems and platforms to acquire and where to optimally deploy these against enemy forces. So these simulations are not a prediction tool. I think it's important to make that clear because it's impossible to know in advance how a real battle will play out. There are too many unknown factors, but what it can do, if you run a simulation of the same scenario over and over again, and then you change one of the factors in a tactic known as comparative simulation, it's possible to make better informed planning decisions. And all this can happen at very little cost. So let's say you run a battle that lasts 24 hours or 48 hours, and you decide to change an artillery system from an older one to one that you're considering for an acquisition. So at the end of the simulated battle, you can receive figures regarding the location of friendly and hostile forces, the extent to which they've been exhausted, casualty figures, and this enables an assessment of the strategic value of the factor that you've changed, whether that's an artillery gun or a fighter jet that comes into the simulated battle, and so on and so forth. So this is a low-cost way to gauge the value of future acquisitions, as well as tactics that can be tried out with these increasingly complex simulations. So I think I'll wrap it up here and let Uzi take it from here. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. John, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, it's great having this conversation about artificial intelligence and all of this stuff when the moderator can't unmute himself. Okay, Uzi, over to you. You've got the floor.
Thank you. I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Fine. I'm trained. My viewpoint is much wider than Yaakov, and I'm trying to look forward at the future battlefield, and I'll take this off. I'm trained by the MDA. I was spending years in Washington, was my second home. So I know in Washington, if you speak, you have to have slides. If you don't have slides, don't speak. So I'll share with you my presentation, which is long and elaborate. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Yes. You are muted again.
Am I muted again?
It's a bomb. This is quite a complex presentation, trying to guess the future of the face of future battlefield. But I'm a history buff, so I'm starting in history. But since we don't have a time, I'll skip the Assyrians, the English longbowmen. Each one of them brought a revolution to the battlefield. Appearance of firearms in Japan. Firearms in Ottoman Empire expansion, and the First World War, which forged war from maneuver to static war, and the Second World War, where technology was used to break out and institute maneuver warfare again. And at the end of Second World War, it still dominates the battlefield to some extent until today, although it's changing very much. The situation of the end of the Second World War was the battlefield was dominated by big, heavy, complex war machines, whether in the air, you can see it here on the sea and on the ground, using imprecise firepower. A lot of firepower, but imprecise firepower. And the best precision that could achieve at that time was dive bombers, and this is an example which I dug out from the Google of the attack on an aircraft carrier, a Japanese aircraft carrier, the Battle of Midway. 24 attacks, 24 dive bombers, achieved only 4 hits. That's the best accuracy at long range that could be achieved at the time. And in the meanwhile, anti-aircraft became more and more sophisticated, from optically sighted to radar sighted to guided missiles, and it drove away this precision, the only precision weapon that existed at the time. And in fact, Augustine Law came in aircraft, and not just aircraft. Augustine Law actually works in every other major weapon system, in tanks, in warships. The platforms are becoming progressively more expensive, actually exponentially more expensive. Augustine joked that in the future, an Air Force could join, any Air Force would afford only one combat aircraft. And he's not far from the truth, because if you're looking at the number of fighting platforms in the US military, Navy, Army, and Air Force, it's going down. It's going down. It's becoming more expensive, so it's going down. In the meanwhile, on the side came the high-tech revolution, which the more latest expression was Moore's law, which doubles computing power every 18, or today maybe 24 months. And this was accompanied by other revolution, which are less famous, but not less important, the MEMS revolution of microelectronic mechanical system, taking complex mechanical system and making them into chips, silicon chips, high-density power sources. We all know it from Tesla, cars. We now have lithium-ion, which is becoming better and better. Super strong permanent magnet. This is an unsung hero of modern technology, but this allows very small, tiny DC motors, which can operate automatic mechanism. And of course, all the plethora of space technologies. I'll just give you one example of what happened during my lifetime as a practicing engineer. When I started my studies in the Israeli Institute of Technology back in the 60s, in the late 50s, the best inertial navigation platform was even bigger than the Bendix 124, and it cost several $1 billion. When I started my career, this was the best inertial navigation system, which would give you a precision of about 1.1% of the range of thousands of kilometers. It weighed about 50 kilograms and cost about $1 million. When I moved to the industry, when I got back to the industry, a few years later, we already had ring laser gyros, which weighed 1.5 kilogram and cost tens of thousands of dollars. And then came the real revolution, the GPS and all the satellite navigation system, which added to the capability of the gyros. Gyros are eliminated by software, became slap-down systems. And now we have those systems which cost a few $100s when they are military, ruggedized to military, and contain both inertial navigation system and satellite navigation system, and they cost nothing. And if you want to see an example, here's an example. Here's my slide, my smartphone. It is also a phone, but it's also missile or UAV navigation system. Take two fine wires out of it, and you can navigate anything with that because it has everything. There's accelerometer, gyroscope, and this one I bought for $150 in a sale in the US. It's an old system, and it can do all this. So this is the real revolution here of anything, precision, miniaturized, and packaging. So next came the next big idea. We take unguided weapons like dumb bombs, and now package all this small, tiny wisdom of navigation into it, give it some steering capability, and call it now a JDAM. So you take a bomb which costs maybe $50,000 because it's mass produced, and add to it a kit which costs about $30,000. And all of a sudden, from statistical, unprecise weapons, World War type, you turn for $80,000 and you create a precision weapon. You can do the same thing with rockets. You take Grad rockets, Katyusha rockets, heavier rockets, and you add precision to the top of it. And all of a sudden, it's better than a ballistic missile. Same thing with UAVs. Simple homemade UAVs that can use to take pictures, the reconnaissance. You add a GPS system here, and a small charge of explosive, and all of a sudden, it's a cruise missile for the poor man cruise missile. It flies slow and slow below the radar, and it hit target with a precision of 1 meter. This, to my mind, is the meeting of Augustine laws with Moore's law. And you see the absurd here. Here is a F-22, which costs $150 million, dropping a JDAM, which costs about 80 meters. And actually, what this aircraft is doing, this $150 million aircraft, is no better than a truck. You just bring the bomb to the neighborhood of the target. Those bombs now have a range of more than 100 kilometers and goes away, while endangering itself and its pilot. So what's more natural than just to fire the same ammunition from the ground, release the aircraft from that for other missions? And indeed, this idea of taking miniaturized navigation and putting into dumb weapons in order to make them smart started with the American MLRS. It was unguided rocket used in 1991 with a range of 45 kilometers. Now they screwed out the warhead, they screwed in a new top, which has a smaller warhead, and all these electronic miracles and some aerodynamics. And now it's a GMLRS, range is around 120 kilometers, and the precision is meters at any range, which is another revolution, that the precision is not dependent anymore on range. Everybody copied that. The Iranians took the Zalzal, simple Zalzal rockets, unguided, turned it into Fatah 110, and a whole line of other copied them. China, Russia, North Korea, everyone else, Israel too. It was scaled up to intermediate range ballistic missile. It was scaled down to ammunition. You take 155 millimeter. This is the first iteration with folding wings and modern precision ammunition, gun and artillery ammunition. Is simply that you take the fuse and replace it with a guided fuse with the little winglets. And the kit costs nothing. You take it costs something, but practically nothing in military terms. So you take this dumb ammunition, which had at a range of 30 kilometers, miss distance of about 30 meters, and you take it to pinpoint precision missile, which you can drop through a window of a terrorist. And even mortar bombs are becoming smart now. And this is one of the projects of DARPA, of taking 0.5 millimeter, 0.5 inch bullet with a sniper gun and smartening up by electronics and very sophisticated aerodynamic control. So actually, you can look at the target and the bullet will track it. Bad news for terrorists, good news for sharpshooters. Going back to the air domain in the Vietnam War, reconnaissance was done by reconnaissance aircraft, big, lumbering, very good targets for North Koreans' missiles. So they switched that to automatic to UAVs, reconnaissance UAVs, and the reconnaissance UAV was made simpler and cheaper both by Israel and the United States. The Israeli Scout and the American Predator were reconnaissance, but what's more logical than either to put under the reconnaissance vehicle to put precision bombs, again, small bombs, they could weigh maybe 20, 25 kilograms, but highly precise or guided by laser weapons, or turn them into suicide UAVs, like you see this Delta Wing Iranian suicide UAV, which did a lot of things. So the first thing is precision from the UAV. We saw it in action in Nagorno-Karabakh this year, late last year. And we saw what self-guided UAVs, simple UAVs, can do in the Abqaiq and Kuwais about almost 2 years ago. Less than 30 vehicles of amok, havoc in the Saudi oil industry. This is one of the vehicles, a very cheap and simple vehicles, and lately they were used, the same vehicles or slightly larger version, to attack a moving ship, and this is a first in history. A moving ship from a distance of few hundred kilometers, and the ship was hit here, exactly where it hurts, or where the crew is. You can see some of the pictures from that here. Technologically, it's a first. The Iranian use something which technically is feasible, but they use it for the first time. But I'm coming to the gist of my presentation that actually this high-tech revolution has not only military consequences, but societal consequences, which impinge back on military consequences. The effect of high-tech revolution, emergence of instant personal communication all over the world, turned the world into a global village. And one of the consequences is it turned war into a reality show. It's now a show seen by the whole world audience, and it's creating a reaction in society. In Western societies, to my mind, it led to the reduced tolerance to military losses on one's own side. This is one of the curious results that democracies are not tolerating victims or casualties among its own military. It's pulling them out. We see it in Afghanistan today. There is a reduced tolerance to collateral damage. The worry when war starts is what happens to the civilian population. So this deters democratic societies for putting troops in the battlefield. And the result is a growing robotization of the battlefield. And here, artificial intelligence is coming here in power. I think the system that Yaakov showed before really ties up very well with this picture of keeping the troops back, not putting them forward, and instead sending robots like UAVs, like robotic ships that we see now, robotic submarines, and robotic ground fighting vehicles. So this is one trend which is very strong. We see it more and more, and we see more and more industrial and military industrial companies going into this unmanned or partly manned fighting systems. However, there is another trend. Another trend is use the same high-tech capabilities to defend the ground platform themselves. We see it on the ground already with a self-defense system on our tanks. We have the anti-missile shield on it. Ship defense missile, this is an old one. We don't see it in the air yet, but it's coming. They are testing now the United States self-defense system for civilian aircraft. We already have self-defense system, although they're passive ones. So there are two trends here. One trend is to take out manned platforms from the battlefield and keep them back in order to save casualties. And the other trend is to take the manned systems and defend them by the same high technologies that threaten them. Which trend will win is not sure. My feeling is that in the end, manned platform will be taken away from the battlefield. And here I go to Martin van Kreffel's vision, technology, in his book, Technology and War, which I read about 40 years ago. And I think it's still good today. His prediction is in this seesaw battle between defense and offense of the platforms is the platforms will be thrown out and future battlefield will be empty. Anything that moves in the battlefield for more than 2 or 3 seconds will be destroyed immediately by precision fire. So we'll see the troops out of the danger, dug down in bunkers, operating screens, and some unmanned machines carrying here and there, fighting each other. How can you win a war? How can you occupy areas? How can you break a stalemate with that? This is got back to the First World War in a sense. This is an interesting subject, which I'll keep for the next conference. And that brings my message to my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uzi. Okay, well, honestly, incredible presentations, both of them, actually quite scary in many ways.
You are muted again.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not touching the mute.
Please
How's that?
unmute yourself.
I have unmuted myself. No?
I
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you.
me?
I can hear you loud and clear right now, John.
All right. Yeah, so Yaakov can hear me. Can you hear me,
Oh,
Uzi? No?
you are
What?
muted.
No, not here. And not down there. But Yaakov, you can hear me, yeah?
Yep, I hear you very well.
All right, this must be
Fine, everyone is muted.
this must be a problem that is not of our making. Let me just see whether or not someone
I think we are muted by the
the
controller.
conference organizers. Right. Okay. So hopefully someone's going to unmute us. Yes? No?
From this end, I hear everybody well.
Jacob,
Not
do you
sure.
hear him?
Yep.
I hear everyone well too.
I don't hear you.
There
I'm
might
not
be
hearing you.
a local connection problem there, Uzi.
Yeah. Oh, that's a shame. That is a shame. Well, anyway, for those of us who are still online and can hear me, Yaakov. Anyway, look. Oh, hang on a sec. Are we getting some?
Can you put your AirPods again, please?
Some action happening behind the scenes.
Okay, all right. No worries.
No. Hello. No. No one. Okay.
I hear
anyway.
you. Yep.
Okay. So we'll
Something is not
we'll
working.
hopefully get this.
Something is not working.
Yeah, something is not working. Working. Hang on. Let
We
me
should
see.
take by sign language.
Hang on. Okay. Dr. Uzi, put your headphones on, please.
Mm.
Headphones.
Yep, that's good.
My mistake.
That's
My
okay.
mistake.
How's that? Can you hear us now?
Yeah, so my mistake.
Awesome. Awesome. See, this is what happens when you play with technology, right?
Yes.
It creeps up on you. It really does. Anyway,
Always.
look, gentlemen,
Yep.
fantastic presentations, both of you. As I was saying earlier, very scary indeed. And I will say that I did my PhD in Australian defence acquisition, so I'm familiar with a lot of the terms that have been used, although when I did it back in the early 1990s, a lot of what you guys were saying that is now reality was mere fantasy back then. But it was just quite astounding to think that we have now crossed the Rubicon on so many different levels of technology. As the moderator, I will start off with a couple of questions, one to Jakob and one to Uzi. To Jakob, what about the development of moral and ethical hazards, with regard to the use of autonomous systems on the ground? I mean, I've done some work in this field, and you do hear a lot of people who are playing in the technology pit that say that there are no real ways in which you can deliver, that sort of clean war, that morally good war, because, someone is going to hack your autonomous system, which will then make it do something that you don't want it to do. What are the thoughts behind that, for instance, Jakob?
Well, I think, the first guarding level that has to be introduced is to make sure that, at least at this current phase of technology, when it comes to activating firepower, there always has to be a human that signs off on the final go, that gives the final go. There always has to be a man in the loop. At least at the current stage of technology, that is the international consensus among democracies, that you cannot have a system that just goes around and opens fire without a human approval. And that human approval will be based on slowing down the potential of firepower. Without that human approval, the potential will be far faster. But because of that moral problem, that moral issue of just letting an autonomous system open fire when it sees fit, and the possibility of mistakes that have not yet been taken care of in terms of a moral issue, and I'm not talking about technologically, but how do we deal, in international law with an autonomous system that makes a deadly mistake? Modern Western militaries don't want to go there, and that's why they're keeping the man in the loop, as far as I understand. Now, in terms of hacking, look, hacking is a threat across the board, no matter what system you develop. And the only solution to that is, of course, to create the highest level protection that a state can invest in its armed systems. Just simply building up the highest possible levels of security and making sure that those systems are as immune as humanly possible, because they are so powerful and sensitive. And I think that's really the only solution that could be put forward on the table when it comes to developing autonomous systems.
Thank you very much for that. Uzi, with regard to Augustine's laws, to what degree do these laws incorporate pork barrel politics when it comes to defense manufacturing in places like the United States? In terms of the average cost of weapons, you're absolutely right. They are astronomical today. But what percentage of that is actually the politics behind developing the weapons? Because on the other hand, you're talking about the average cost of weapons in drones, for instance, or other simpler platforms, or even retrofitting your dumb bomb with a GPS kit. It's actually quite cheap. So you've got like the platforms that are astronomical, and then you've got these other simpler platforms that are very, very inexpensive to use, and arguably one would say sustainable.
There is probably, I guess, a certain amount of pork in the cost of American weapons. They are amazingly expensive when you compare them to similar weapons made elsewhere. Not by much. The Europeans also have a pork. Remember, that pork is not exactly pork. It's the way of the American government to sustain its defense industries. Otherwise, they would have to subsidize them directly. So instead, they expect the customers to subsidize them. But still, if you take off this layer of subsidy, as you call it, pork, still the weapons become more and more expensive because they are becoming more and more vulnerable. And if you're looking at the modern system, an aircraft, or even you take a warship. I got this number from our Navy about 20 years ago already, that 60% of the ship's value was the self-defense systems of the ship, just to keep alive.
Right. Against
torpedoes, against aircraft, against everything. And only 40% were offensive capabilities. So this is true. The growing vulnerability of big, heavy, and non-stealthy platforms is becoming so much. In order to defend themselves, they must become more and more expensive. They must be faster. They must be higher. They must be made more stealthy, which costs money by itself. Yeah. And if they are so expensive, since they are so expensive to survive, you put on them the best offensive capability that you have, like what you have on F-35, which is really almost science fiction capability of observation and surveillance and threat sensing. Because since it's so expensive, you don't spare on the expensive, putting expensive self-awareness system on it. So you see the process is almost unavoidable, and it comes to a certain edge. Now we are having all the world, all the industrialist nations are doing the 5th generation aircraft with several variations. What is the 6th generation? Probably unmanned. So we are going back. It becomes, Augustine was right. It becomes unsustainable. So it's going back to something which needs less system and will be probably less expensive because of that. So we've gone the whole cycle. To your question, the pork or the subsidy is there, but it's not. I don't think it's the main cause of Augustine's law.
Gentlemen, I have to ask. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I have to ask a question of both of you. At what point are we in danger of fetishizing defense technology today because of its high-tech characteristics? We've only just witnessed the failure of a military mission in Afghanistan after 20 years and arguably trillions of dollars being invested. Many of the weapon systems that the Americans and coalition brought to the table were at the leading edge, but the Americans and the coalition lost to what you would consider a group that selectively used whatever they could scrounge off from the black market and whatever they could purchase from other bad guys out there. So you're looking at, again, a predominantly low-tech force having defeated a high-tech force. So when it really comes down to war fighting and the application of military technology, is there something missing, like the actual will of a government to have a strategy that can be applied in a way that makes sense for the military technology? Because absent of that, a guy in a Toyota pickup with an AK-47 can defeat, a technologically supreme entity.
John, I agree with the premise in your question. I think when we're looking at this point in time, this junction in history, technology is not a replacement for fighting spirit, and it certainly is not a replacement for strategy. Those are absolutely essential components, and the technology is supposed to integrate into that. However, what I would say is that when I'm looking at it from an Israeli military perspective, when I'm looking out across the region and at where the adversaries are going, which is miniaturized strike capabilities, precision strike capabilities, urban warfare, and this issue of human shielding and time-sensitive targeting, which is creating real challenges and undercutting Israel's traditional advantages on the battlefield. The technology is the way forward to deal with that, is equipping the war fighters with the ability to deal with these new kinds of enemies, getting past the idea that, we're fighting 20th century's wars with symmetrical foes. We have to completely get rid of that thinking. And I think the technology that we're looking at here is a big part of the ability of a Western military force to deal with this kind of asymmetrical hybrid foe that is, at least in this region in the Middle East, becoming, the absolute norm.
Uzi, would you like to?
I think I'll pick up on what Yaakov said, because the thing is that we are fighting two different. The modern battle platforms, those are becoming unaffordable, are still the outcome of the Second World War. The major fighting machines expecting to fight the opposite fighting machine. Asymmetric war is exactly what it is, asymmetric. You take an AED and you blow up a tank with that. So in order to defeat asymmetric war, you have either to move into asymmetric war yourself, that means put boots on the ground, send your soldiers. Remember what Ord Wingate did in Palestine in the end of the 30s. He fought guerrilla warfare by fighting his own guerrilla warfare, putting boots on the ground. As they raid you, you raid them. And this is a cool thing to say, and because it takes a lot of collateral damage. And also unappetizing anymore today, because for democratic countries to endanger their own troops is now almost unacceptable. Yeah. See what happens when there is. Let's not talk about Israel. Look at Canada. When they had several people killed, soldiers died in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan, they brought them home in full military honor. Convoys of the coffins drove for 100 kilometers with all the firefighting and police forces standing on the side of the road and saluting with the flags. But they lost maybe several hundred people, soldiers killed. At the same time, they had maybe 20 or 30,000 Canadians dying on the road from road accidents. So the thing is that this sensitivity, which is human, to victims among the military, is not allowing democracies, at least, to go back to foot fighting. So we are driven to technology, as Yaakov said. We have to break this tie and go back into asymmetric war using high technology in order to become symmetric again. Yeah. Whether this will work or not, I don't know. I have my hopes and I have my doubts. So we'll see.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Now, on to some questions that came in from our audience. Firstly, to what extent will we see expanding domains of conflict, such as in outer space, the deep oceans and the Arctic? Who would like a crack at that one?
Uzi, I think the space question is, who can answer
Certainly
that better than you?
The thing is not whether technically it's possible to fight in space. It's possible. There is international, there's not an international law, but there's an international norm against fighting in space. Same thing about South Pole. The thing is that we find that international norms hold out until there is an all-out war between superpowers that would want to grab hold of the planet, either in order to survive or in order to conquer the planet, more or less. I don't see Nazi Germany, for instance, holding back from fighting in space if it could, or occupying the South Pole if it give it any advantage. They would do that without thinking twice. And I suspect that the Soviet Union too would have done it. It was deterred from doing that. So there is no guarantee or no technological barrier against fighting in space or fighting in the deep sea or fighting in the South Pole. There is just international understanding, norms, and deterrence. As long as this holds, there will be no fighting in all these regimes. If these norms don't hold, well, the future will speak for itself.
Yaakov, do you agree with that?
I do. I think that on a more tactical and technological level, the ability of missile defense systems, and I'm sure that Uzi will be able to weigh in on this in great detail if he wanted to. The ability of systems such as the Arrow 3 here in Israel to intercept ballistic missiles in space outside of the atmosphere is becoming more sophisticated, more advanced. And of course, the US missile defense systems are also, some of them able to operate in space. And I think that that's going to be the first front line. Missile defense in space using better and better systems. What happens after that? Of course, we have the whole issue of targeting satellites, using missile systems to bring down and shoot satellites. We've had reports of various world powers developing that technology. It's a disturbing technology because it does, bring a new offensive warfare capability into space and chips away at this sort of norm that you were discussing. So I think there will be a gradual chipping away of this norm as various powers develop the ability to operate in space. And I think it's inevitable that as time goes by, people will gain the understanding that there's a norm, but it's not really being observed in terms of preventing warfare in space.
Thanks. Okay, so should international law extend the right to use proportionate force and self-defense in cyber conflict to commercial actors?
A repeat of the question, please.
I think what the questioner wants to know whether or not international law could be used in order to sort of temper some of the cyber conflicts that we're currently having, especially against commercial actors. I mean, here in Australia, for instance, we were hacked quite badly by forces by the People's Republic of wherever. And anyway, at that stage, that kind of attack revealed quite a level of vulnerability in Australia, not so much in terms of government, although government was affected by this, but by the commercial actors themselves, those businesses that, basically support your commercial endeavors that are all dependent on, some form of, linkage to the internet. So how can we prevent the use of cyber, create some sort of deterrent against its use against civilian infrastructure, cyber infrastructure? Is there a way that we can do that, do you think?
I think you mentioned the answer in the question, which is deterrence. I think deterrence is the only way to try and prevent cyber attacks on any target, especially civilian strategic installations. I think international law is highly ineffective at preventing this because cyber attacks are deniable. They can be done through proxies. They're low profile. They're the ideal way for anybody to try and hide their identity and say, prove that it was me. And we're seeing that happen on a daily basis. The cyber warfare is only becoming more and more intensive. And I think the idea that international law can stop it is a little bit old-fashioned, and not. There should, of course, be international law that targets this kind of activity. But I think the real means to deal with it is through deterrence and developing counter cyber capabilities, the ability to trace the attacker and respond. Like any other field of warfare, I think deterrence is really the main way to stop these kinds of attacks.
Uzi, anything to say on that?
Yeah, I think you have to look at one aspect of it. Since cyber warfare and cyber crime are interconnected, basically every cyber attack is a crime. There is a law against it, international law, local law, and still the law is broken, like in everything else. I mean, there are gangs now. Drugs are illegal, but we have whole cartels selling drugs. What can international norms do against it? Nothing, because it's theoretically shouldn't have been done at all, because it's a criminal. So I agree with Jacob that deterrence or counter-strike, deterrence bar counter-strike, is the only measure that may keep some lead on this thing. It won't stop it because the temptation is too much. It's like drugs.
Interesting you should say that, because, after the cyber attack against Australia, and because of that whole plausible deniability thing, the Prime Minister could not openly say who was, the aggressor. And then there was a sense from the Australian public to say, well, we're powerless to do anything about it, because even if the government was doing something against it, doing a countermeasure against the threat, we would never know about it anyway. All we hear about is when the servers go down and we can't go to work based on the fact that our computers aren't working since they were hacked by unknown actors. So in that sense, it's really, it puts us in a very difficult position, because we the people want our governments to proactively defend us. And we the people also want to see our governments taking a slap at the opponent. So because of this cloak and dagger, subterranean, covert kind of way in which we're fighting the cyber war at the moment, we're not getting satisfaction enough. Do you think that would be a problem?
It is a problem because we're talking about really the awareness campaign that comes alongside the cyber campaign. So obviously, countries that are not democratic and don't have a free press, et cetera, will do a better job of covering up the damages of a cyber attack. And that's not necessarily a negative thing for a democracy that's responding to a cyber attack, because providing the target with an area of deniability could actually decrease tensions, and you could transmit the message of deterrence without escalating it further and causing the adversary to lose face. So there are pros and cons to this complex situation in which the targeted party, if it's not a democracy, can hide its damage. It's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of preventing escalation. But there are also ways around it. I think, a democracy, if it wants to leak or signal, that harm has been done in response to a massive cyber attack, there are also ways to do that. And governments and security agencies and defense establishments have the ability to leak information if they so choose to do so.
Uzi, anything on that?
Oh, I think with cyber we'll have to live, and also put a lot of stress on defense. Although defense will always be second, but to stay one step ahead with defense, as the aggressors are trying to keep one step ahead, you have to keep one step ahead in your defense. And I think that Israel is doing quite a good job in getting organized with the cyber war room and people who react immediately. I think that's the way to go, to mitigate, not to eliminate, but to mitigate the problem.
Thank you. Okay, another couple of questions before we close the E-Symposium down. One very interesting one came through. When does an attack on a private company constitute an act of war? And I think that in this age of coercive statecraft and gray zone threats, this is a very, very relevant question to ask. Who'd like to have the first go? Maybe we'll start off with Uzi.
Well, I think that this private company is running in national infrastructure, like water purifying. Then it's like attack on the state itself. If you're talking about some company that sells dried goods or clothing, it's a commercial matter. But it's not commercial when you attack power stations, power generating companies, water desalination, or communication, national communication. This is basically, although it's on a private company, it's an act of war. Those companies are working for the government, basically national functions. And only because we are living in a capitalist society, they are not nationalized, they're privatized.
Yeah.
I might challenge the idea that we can use the words act of war and cyber in the 21st century, because the term act of war really has a lot of 20th century connotations. A state attacks, it invades a capital, it moves military forces. We're in casus belli, act of war, and then, we mobilize and we go to war. And I think the situation today is far more gray. What we have is constant cyber warfare. And I think that we have to internalize that situation and get used to it. And in that context, we can set red lines and say, look, if you, hit this target, you can expect us to go after your more sensitive targets. None of this has to amount to an act of war when it comes to physical war. It can remain in the cyber sphere. It can complement a kinetic exchange of fire. It can remain in the cyber realm. There are many, many possibilities, and I think we have to be more flexible in terms of how we view cyber warfare, and understand that it's a constant confrontation that's not going away, and therefore there's not going to be a clear transition from peace to war like we saw in past centuries.
Yeah. I left the best to last. If an increased reliance on machines for remote killing makes combat more tolerable for our societies, would it therefore not make war more likely? Yaakov?
Yeah, define war.
Yeah, okay. Uzi, go.
Yeah, define war. War, there is combat. War is a formal state of affairs. That means wars are declared. But we have a situation with widespread war. War is not declared. So will it encourage governments to declare war? I don't think so. Because the declaration of war has a lot of meaning. It's not just war fighting. War has several layers. It's economic layers. It has judicial layers. It has legal layers, and it's all kinds of things. So I don't think that this thing of automatization of the battlefield is going to encourage governments to. Nobody will feel himself winning. You declare war either when your back is to the wall, like the United States in the 7th of December 1941, or because you feel that you are going to win, like Hitler in September 39. Sure, he's going to win. I don't think that this remote operation capability is going to give anyone any comfort that he's going to win. So this by itself, I don't think is a generator of war declarations. Maybe a generator of wars, but not of war declarations. That's about it.
Okay, thank you.
I would quickly add that at the end of the day, warfare, combat in any form is a part of the human condition. And as long as essential human nature it has not changed fundamentally, we are going to continue to see combat. And what's changing is the means of combat, perhaps the scope, but the technology is an evolution of something that is far older, and a part of the human condition, and therefore I don't think it's going to fundamentally change whether warfare occurs or not, because what determines that is a set of human conditions, characteristics, ideologies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the answer is in our minds far more than the technology that we deploy.
Thank you for that. Well, gentlemen and audience, that brings this E-Symposium to a close. Thanks to our guests, Jakob Lapin and Dr. Uzi Rubin. Thanks to the team at Trends Research and Advisory for hosting this E-Symposium. And thanks to our audience for their attendance and for their participation. From me, John Bruni, in Adelaide, goodbye.
Goodbye.